So now let's start filling this thing in. I'm gonna show you here. I have like on Paint. It's easier if you visualize what you want to do. So what I want to do is I want to drop down here. So I'm gonna put this as like a here and then another. I'm writing with my mouse, so sorry for the bad handwriting. So D here, right? And I want like a arrow, like I said here, and then I need a text box for my input, text, and then an output. Okay, and then a button here. Sorry for the bad handwriting. So I have to write with the mouse. Okay, so this is how I kind of want my uh, my my GUI to look. I have two drop-down menus, and I can show you again here if I run this. Yeah, here. See this? It's two drop-down menus here. I can like pick like my options, and then I can type in text for my input, what I want to change, and then press the button for convert, and it'll give me a new output for the converted unit. So this is good to visualize, okay? So now that I visualize this, all right, now I actually need to start programming it. So here's what we're gonna do, okay? So I'm gonna delete this. I'm gonna delete. All right. So first of all, we're going to have to do something called a frame. What is a frame? A frame is basically, so this is your window, all right? This is the empty window you have. A frame is like something called like a container. What is this container? Everything you put in this UI, like the drop-down menu I showed you here, see this drop-down, see this arrow, see this text box, see this output here, see this button, they're all called widgets. Each part of this is called a widget. So this is a button widget, a text box widget, a label widget, drop-down, like it's called option menu in this, and in Tkinter it's called option menu, the drop-down. That's another widget. And see how like these widgets here, they're on the same line, like they're kind of um, orientated in the same area, and you just have to, it's like only going to the right. What I do is, instead of, if I want to like organize my widgets together, so my drop down is, for example, like I want to organize them to be next to each other, right? Two drop downs here. The best thing to do is to put these widgets in something called a container, or in Tkinter it's called a frame. So think of it as like a space in the GUI, and the empty GUI, that you can add two widgets inside. So there's a drop down here, there's an arrow here, there's a drop down here. And what's good about this is that now if I want to move these two drop downs, okay, like if I want to move them away around, right? Say I want my drop downs to be at the bottom now, like my options here. These, instead of at the top, I want them at the bottom. Instead of actually moving each one separately, like saying if this go down, go down, go down, I can just move the container it's in, which combines them all, move them down, and now I have it down here, for example. That's one way you do, like one thing why you would use containers, just like to combine multiple widgets together that are related to each other, kind of. So we're going to make a couple of frames here, which a frame is equal, I'm going to just say it here, frame is a container. So I'm going to make my drop-down frame. Drop-down frame, okay? So drop-down container, which is going to have all my drop-down options. And what you do is you say tk dot. You always have to use tk dot if you want to use any library from any function from this Tkinter library, right? So here, see how the tk.tk is, because this is not in my Python file. It's in a different Python file somewhere in my computer. But I want to use it. So I say tk dot, kind of like a function here, dot, and then I can do what I want. So for the frame, is going to be just frame like this. Okay, tk.frame. So I'm creating a new frame like this. So in my frame, there's a couple of things you have to. There's one thing you have to put, that's most important is you say master is equal to. What this means is this: what is this frame going to be on? Like right now, you just created an empty frame, but it doesn't know where am I gonna put this frame, or like where is this frame gonna be added? And you want to tell it this frame is actually added onto this window. So you see here how we have a window, and if you don't tell it, like it won't know. Like it could be like this frame is outside this window. It won't know. It won't put it. You have to tell it that the frame is inside this window. So basically, say master is equal to, and see how we said window here. You can just say window. So this frame is inside the window. Okay, and then now let's look at this GUI again. What else do I need? I need this input and output. That's another container. I want them to always be together, right? So this input and output, I want them always to be together. So I'm gonna make a container just for those two, and I'm gonna call it row frame. 1 second. Yes, row frame. Okay. Actually, you don't even need to call it, but I'll call it row frame because like they're all in the same kind of like area. Okay. You can call it anything you want, by the way. tk dot frame. I have to also initialize it, and I have to say master is equal to window. So this frame is inside the window or this container. And I just press enter to make it look nice. Okay. So now once I created my frame, okay. Now we have the two frames we want, and see this convert button. I won't put it in a frame because what the whole point of a container is if you have multiple widgets and you want to combine them. But since the convert button is just one widget, it's like a button here, right? Say this is a button, okay, be here. It doesn't make sense to just make a container to hold one thing, right? You don't want to like, it doesn't make sense to do this. Just have one, like a container just for the button. So I won't create a container for the button. Actually, what I'll do is I'll just put the button straight on the window, on this GUI, on this whole thing, like in this empty space. I'll just put it straight on. But for these ones, I want them connected together. These two are connected together. These two are connected together. That's why I make a container for the input output and for the drop downs. Okay, so now let's start with the drop downs. Okay, so this is how you do a drop down. So first I'm gonna do my input units. So if you do units input equals to tk dot. So I want to put in my dropdown a piece of text like here, like CPA here. This text, to do that, I can't just do a string like I do in regular Python. What I have to do is there's a function inside tkinter. It's for text inside the GUI. So string is good for text in your code, like for terminal. But if you want to do it for the GUI, like as a text in a GUI, what you do is there's a thing called string var. And it's a function inside this tkinter library. And what I do is this string var, what it is I have to give it first, where is this text going to be added, okay? So where is this text going to be added? We have to give it the dropdown frame because this is part of the dropdown, right? So tk.string_var dropdown frame. So I said, okay, I'm creating a string and I'm adding it to the dropdown frame, the container with the dropdown. And next line, I say units input. So this thing here, dot set. Before we do that, actually, let me do something. So you see how we have this list of things, right? These list of pressure units. I need to store them somewhere, right? So what I'll do is, in the beginning here, before window equals tk.tk, okay, here in the very beginning, I'm gonna do this. I'm gonna create an array. Let me actually make it so you can do like for arrays you can put it all on one line, or you can do a space after every comma. like I did here. This makes it easier for me to see what's inside the array. But if you want to do it all on one line, you can do the same thing. It's just a list of pressure units. Okay. So mmHg, bar, pascals, atmosphere. These are my pressure units. So now that I have that list, okay, what I want to do is this. I want to see how my drop down menu has, when you open it, like I'm gonna run it again here. See, look at when I start the drop down. See, when I start it, it has a default pressure set. So it's pascals to mmHg in the beginning when you first run it, and then you can change it later on. Like you can go like this, you can do this. But when you first run it, it's defaulted to pascals to mmHg like this. I have to actually code that in. I have to tell it. So the default text you put, or the default option you put, is pascals, and for the input. So what I do is this. I say unit input dot set. Okay. And what I do is I set, and then I put here, and I have to say this array, right? Pressure units. And which one is pascals? Pascals is the second third index, which is number 2 in arrays, right? So 2 here. So if I say pressures 2, this will give me pascals, PA, right? Pressures units 2, that's PA. And I dot set, basically I just tell it this is the default value. As soon as I run the program, have it set on PA. That's the beginning thing. And then next thing, I want to create a new, so this is just setting the text, right? But now I actually need to create the option thing. So see how I can click it and I click on options, different options. Now I have to do that part. To do that part, I do something called dropdown inputs. Inputs like this. This is a variable name I'm going to create. So this is a new dropdown, dropdown thing for the inputs. Okay, I'm going to make it equal to, and this is where you actually do the dropdown. So you say tk dot, and then tkinter in this here in this library. A dropdown is called an option menu. Okay, a dropdown is called an option menu. So think of it as like these are options, and it's a menu, and you're looking through these menu of options. It's called an option menu, and you open the brackets, and what you put in first is where is this option menu going to be added. So we said here in here, right? We want all our dropdowns inside this container, right? So this container. So if we want it in this container, we have to tell it, okay, what is the frame? What is the container called? It's called Dropdown Frame. So that's the first thing I'm going to put in, Dropdown Frame. That's where I'm going to put this dropdown, this option menu. And then the second thing you put in is your unit input. So so what the second thing is, it'll ask, oh yeah, so in my options menu, what should my default value be? My default value we set here as pressure units 2, which is pascals, right? Here, these are default for input. Like when I open my program, it should be set at that. So I'm gonna say units input. See here now, my default is this pascals unit input, and this is just like a string, like I told you guys. In regular Python, you just make a string, but in tkinter you have to do it this way because it's going to be added to the GUI. It's not just like a regular string you print. So it's done this way. And here you don't have to say like an array. You can just type like pascals like this, right? But since I'm using this array, I'm going to put the array here. See, it's going to just take this value. And then one more thing you have to add after the units input, which is the default value. What you do is this. There's one more thing. What is it? It's basically, where are my options going to be? So if see here, when I click, I have 4 options. It needs to know what these options are. So it's going to create a dropdown, but it needs to know what the options are going to be. So I have to give it this array and tell it, these are my options. Make that as the options for the dropdown menu. Okay. So what I do is I do this, but you have to put a star and then pressure the name of the array. Okay, I'll tell you why it does. You have to do this. What star does is basically, since this is an array, right? What this function actually wants is this. It wants you to do um, mmhg and then another comma and then another like pa and then another comma and then so on. You know, it wants you to set to do it one by one. Like it doesn't like an array or a list. It doesn't like taking this list. It wants you to do just comma each option. But I want to use an array because like if it's too much stuff, I don't want to like have to do a comma, mmhg, comma, pa, all that. Kind of, yeah. But here, what it is actually, it makes it as if you do pressure input, pressure units like this, it'll take each value here and just put it in here as an argument to the function. See how these are arguments to the function? These are parameters you put into the function. So what it does here just takes every single value of this array and adds it as an argument to the function. Yeah, someone asked, is star like a pointer? It is kind of like it changed the it changes, if you know like more programming like words, like it changes this array to an iterable and then it puts it in here. So yeah. So this is all we need to do to create this dropdown. Okay, and now I'm gonna go. So let me just do this for now. Grid. Don't mind this for now. I'm gonna explain it in a bit, but let's create the second dropdown. Okay. So the second dropdown is my output dropdown. I created this input one, right? This one, the left one. Now I need to create the right one. Well, how do I create this right one? Isn't it the same thing? Like this is the same as my output. So I can just copy this code. Actually, let me just copy like all this and paste it after it. But instead of units input, I want to make it units output. So it's new dropdown, but I'm going to call it output instead. Right? And then output. And the only thing is, see here, dot set pressure units 2. How I set it is that the output's default value is mmhg. And that's in my array, that's index 0. Right? So instead of doing index 2 here for my default value, I'm going to put 0. So now my output will have a default of mmhg, and my input has a default of pascals. And then one more thing you have to change is in here, in this function option menu, instead of putting units input like this, you put units output. So copy this. So see here, I made 2 dropdowns here, and each dropdown is inside the dropdown frame inside this container that I made, a container that I put the dropdown in. So they're connected through this dropdown frame, through this container. They're in the same container. And this one has a default value of this, which is pascals. This one has default value of mmhg, which is here. And then I give it the options. See the options list here, pressure units. I give both the same options, so you can these are the options you have for the dropdown. Okay, so now how come on line 20 you have dropdown inputs with an S at the end? Where? Line 20. Oh, doesn't matter. It's just the name of the variable. I can do S here. Yeah, I just forgot to put the S. It's just the name of the variable. I can just say it's called that. Okay, I can call it like that. Okay, so let's go to this arrow. Okay, this arrow in here. This is also another widget. So you see this arrow. We had these dropdowns, but now I need an arrow in between them to show, like, visually show that I'm converting from here to here. And this arrow is called a label. A label is like something you want to display inside this GUI, right? and I want to display this arrow. So I want to display a label with this arrow inside it. So how do I create a label? So I'm gonna write label arrow like this. I'm gonna say tk, so tkinter dot label. Okay, I'm gonna make a new label. And the label, I have to also put this thing, which is say master equals to. So now you want to know. So remember here we said master equals to window for the frame. For the label, I have to say, where am I gonna put this label, right? So if you look back at the here, okay, I can either put this label just on the GUI itself, right, like anywhere here. Which if I want to do that, then I say master equals to window, so just on like the GUI itself. But what I actually want is I want this label inside this container because it is related to both. It is related to the dropdowns. So I want it in the same container, right, in this square here. So the master actually is not going to be my window. It's going to be my dropdown frame. It's the same container. So now all these three widgets, the dropdown, the two dropdowns, and the arrow, are all connected through this container. Okay. So now that I have a label like this, what I'm gonna do is this. I'm gonna do a comma, and then you're gonna do anchor equals. Anchor equals means like, okay, let me just finish center. Okay. So what this argument does, it says I want to center it. So you know how it's centered between these two? If you do anchor equals center, it does that. It centers it between these two dropdowns. So now it's centered. And now I want to do, please close the console so it's more of the code is visible. Sure. Is this better? Okay. So label, where were we? Okay, so anchor center. So I centered it here. I anchored it to the center. So if you think about the anchor, it just stops it somewhere. So I'm just gonna stop it in the center. And then after that, you have to add. So as I told you guys, a label is like a text, right? So for the text, or like the label you want to put, right now we want to put a symbol, okay? So you have to give it this, here, look. So see this text, one second. See this argument I say? I say text equals to, and what you can do here, you put a string, right? And in this string, you can actually say anything. You can say like a name, you can say a string like a word, or you can say a character, you can say a number, you can say anything you want to display. In Python, you can actually do like \capital N, and then this like squiggly bracket, and this is for symbols. You know, like there's a degree symbol for Celsius. There's like a Fahrenheit symbol. Well, right arrow is actually also a symbol, and it's called this. So if you want to just copy this, \N, capital N, and then squiggly brackets open inside the string. Okay. Rightwards black arrow, all capital. And that is actually a string in the sorry, like a symbol inside the Python. So now these are the three things I need to give to the label. Where it's going to be put, I don't need to give this, but I gave it because I wanted to center it. And you also need to give it a text. So what is it gonna? What's the label gonna be? Like what you're gonna put in it? I put a arrow. Okay. So now that I have that, the one thing I want to do is this. Label. So right now it doesn't know like how big you want this arrow to be. Default, like if you don't tell it anything, the default makes it kind of small. I want to make it a bit bigger. So you do label arrow. So this thing dot, and then config. See this config and open. So configure. Basically, you're gonna change the setting inside, and this is what you actually copy in. Font equals to, and I give it a font, so Arial font. And then here's the size. So I give it size 25. So I made the arrow a bit bigger. It's actually default. It's actually smaller, I just made it a bit bigger. And after I make this arrow, I'm going to show you how to actually display this right now. Okay, so do the same thing for these drop-down inputs, okay? So I'm going to do with you here. After drop-down inputs, what you want to do is drop down inputs like this, .config also. Same exact thing. And you copy the same thing, but I'm going to actually do this. 1 second. Font, copy this font thing. Just do it here. Use the same font, Arial, and what am I gonna do for this one? Size 15. I found, like, I was testing it. You might like when you do your own GUI, you might want to test it and like play around with it until you think it's good enough. I found the best size for my GUI to be 15 for the drop down, and 25 for the label for the arrow. And I'm gonna also copy this here, but I'm gonna change this to drop-down outputs. Instead of drop-down inputs, it's going to be drop-down outputs. I'm also going to configure it, and I'll give it the font Arial and the size 15. What is GUI? A GUI is a graphical user interface. This is a GUI. It's a graphical user interface. Remember, like, you know how when I showed you the other Python file when I was explaining the Python fundamentals, everything was printed into the terminal. It's not like
Yeah.
graphical. Yeah, this is the graphical user interface. You can actually see like a program, like, you know, like any program you use now is a GUI.
Mm-hmm.
So yeah, this is the program. It's a GUI.
Okay,
All
thanks
right.
for explaining.
So now you have .config. I set these fonts. All right. And now I want to place them on my GUI right now. Right now, if I open this, it's still an empty GUI because I created them, but I didn't place them on it yet. So I'll show you how to place them. So I'm gonna open another one here. Okay. So you can use something like a grid system. Okay. If this is my GUI, right? The blank GUI. Right now I can like divide it into like three rows. Oh, sorry, 4 rows and 3 columns. Okay. And remember in my other this one here. Okay. Let's kind of look at the side by side so you can see. So I want it's very easy if you see it like this. So I want this drop down to be on here, and then my arrow to be here, and my drop down to be here. See how we put each widget in its own column to make it separate? Like I made this column for D, this is for my arrow, and this is for my other drop down. And then I want the text box here. So text. Okay. Sorry for the bad handwriting. And then here I could say output. I'm just like kind of the GUI I had, I'm drawing it out in like a grid system. And then here I want my button. Okay, so see here how I made it. It's gonna be 0, 1, 2. If you also like count it here, so 0. It starts with 0, so 0, 1, 2. This is column 0, column 1, column 2, and then row 0, row 1, row 2, row 3. Now, when we're gonna code it, we're gonna have to use these numbers, and we're basically gonna for each widget, we're going to specify where we want it on this grid system. So I said I want this at 0, 0, row 0, column 0, and I want the arrow at row 0, column 1, and I want the other drop down at row 0, column 2, and so on. I want the text at row 1, column 1. So that is how I want to do it. So let's start doing that right now. So you go back to these, okay? So let me first do for the drop down for the inputs, okay? Let's put it onto the thing. So that's why I put grid here, because I'm gonna do it right now. So I say drop down input. So this I bring this variable back. So this is the option menu that I had, the drop down, and I say dot grid. I'm basically placing it on the grid, and I set it row equals to, and I just looked back at here, said I wanted the first one at row equals to 0, right? Row equals to 0, and then comma column equals to um, where is the column here? I wanted to give it to the column 0 also, right? Because these row 0, column 0, right? So I'll put 0 here. And then another thing here. And um, so right now, what I wanted to do is this. There's this thing called sticky. Okay, sticky equals to do this, okay? And I'll tell you what this is. So sticky is basically kind of you telling the computer where you want this grid to be, like, sorry, this drop-down input. If I look at my on here, okay, say this widget or this button is this big, okay, it's this big, this square, right? There's actually a lot of space that's not being used. So if I say sticky equals to EW, it means east to west, right? And what it does is just makes this, instead of this small square, it uh, it makes it so that it's like um, fits this whole like row column. It just stretches it. So I'm trying to stretch it from here to here. So that's why I say sticky is equal to the EW. Basically, it sticks to the east and west. So how do you configure how big your grid is? It actually does that on its own. So if I put column 2 here, it'll know on its own that my grid goes up to column 2. Right now, because I only set dot grid row 0 equals to column 2, what it is what's going to do is actually it's just going to make a GUI like this with one row but 2 columns like this. Oh, 3 columns, sorry, because it's a 0, 1, 2, right? Because I did 2 here. So if I put anything in column 2, then it already knows that there's one row, because I only said one row, row 0 right now, right? But I put something in column 2, so it created column 1, column 0, and put column 2, and this is it. If I add another row in a different thing, it's just going to divide it and make another row. And now this row has its columns too. So it's dynamic, like it creates it on its own. But I want this at column 0, okay. So this is good. We did this grid for this. Now let's copy it. Let's do the same for outputs, okay? I'm going to copy the drop-down outputs. Instead of drop-down inputs here, I'm going to put drop-down outputs. And I just do dot grid. Now let's look back at my grid. Where do I want the second drop-down? I want it at column 2, row 0, okay? So I put the row 0 the same. But column now I want to change it to 2. So now my program knows actually I have 3 columns, not only one, because I added something in column 2. It automatically knows that. So row 0, column equals to 2. And I also want the sticky equals to EW, meaning stretch it in that column. Like I want it to be stretched. Okay? So this is for the drop-down inputs, okay? Output, sorry. Now I also want to do the same thing for the label. The label we said, give me a second, where's the label here? Label we said is in column 1. So I'm just going to copy this. I'm going to copy label arrow, and instead of drop-down outputs, I'm going to say label arrow. And label arrow dot grid, row equals 0, column equals to. Now this column is equal to 1, right? Because we said here column equals to 1, row equals to 0. This is where I want my arrow. Okay, it's like a grid system. Now that I have that, in order to output this, so we put this all in something called a drop-down frame, right? Drop-down frame. And I told you guys here that if I wanted to move this frame, I can move all of them together very easily, right? I can move it here, I can move it up there. So if you think about it, I also need to do a grid for the frame itself, for this container, because the container could be in row 0, it could be in row 1, could be in row 2, right? So I want to tell my container start at row 0, column 0, and just like make a container from there, right? So I have to actually take my, see this drop down frame I made in the top. I do the same thing. So I say drop down frame dot grid, okay, and I'm gonna say row equals to 0, column equals to 0. So I'll tell you why I did that, because I wanted to start the drop down frame from this point, and it on its own, because I put stuff until column 2 here. See here, column 2. I put stuff until column 2. It'll know to expand this frame up to column 2. But you want to tell it the starting point of the frame. The starting point of the frame is at 0, 0, right? So drop down frame dot grid is equal to so row equals 0, column equals 0, and then let's see what's the next. All right, so I want to add, to make my GUI look good. I'll actually just run this for now. You're gonna see this. We have now our drop downs with our arrow, but see how it's like very squished in, and the borders are very close to the drop downs. What if I want to like make some space between these? Like I don't want it to all be like stuck to the sides of the program. I want to make some space between them. What I do is there's something called the padding. Okay, a padding is just like you add some extra space between for each side. Okay, and you can put that all inside the grid here. So you say here, I want to say pad x is equal to 10, pad y is equal to 10, and this is actually pixels, so 10 pixels. Okay, so pad x is in the x direction. So if you look at it here now, see how now there's more space between them. So there's 10 pixels in this direction, 10 pixels in this direction. The y, and I put it x and y. So I just made some space between the border of the GUI and these drop downs. And also, I want to also do one thing here. Uh, drop down frame. No, it's actually good. Yeah, this is all I want here. Drop down frame dot grid. This. So now we have created our first part of our GUI, our drop down menu, and now we can go on to the text and the label. This is much faster.